Hey folks, Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. Welcome to another episode of Cracking the Comms Code. Hope you're wrapping up your week in anticipation of America's 250th birthday. And today we're not going to talk about that. We're actually going to talk about something totally different, which is it is the start of a new fiscal year for a lot of companies, and for other communications executives, it is time to start looking at Q1 for next year. And what the heck does that mean? Because there's so much going on in the comms world right now. And so we have Keith, Jen, and Meredith. We're going to talk about how to see around corners, what's coming down the pike in corporate comms. Yes, we'll talk about AI. Yes, we're going to talk about the Wall Street Journal's claim that publicists are storming the C-suite and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm going to ask Keith, Jen, and Meredith to introduce themselves. We're going to get into this, and please bring your questions to the comments. Keith?
Hi. Hi, everybody. Hi, Dr. Nick. So I'm Keith Berman. I am, as Dustin described me, a ferocious advocate for internal communications, which I
Yep.
appreciated. And also I will call out the fact that he said that for some reason my black T-shirt was fashionable and professional,
That's
even though
exactly
I
what I'm
don't.
saying.
It
Yep.
warms my emo heart to do that. So honestly, like I feel like this could be my new calling card, like Meredith's hat. So um, I I've been across a whole bunch of different aspects of communications. As those who know me know, I started out as an FM rock radio DJ. I moved into PR and the external comm side of things. I was a journalist for many years, and now I've been sitting in internal comms for the last 12 or 13 years and kind of mixing between internal and corporate comms. And yeah, I firmly believe that internal comms is a driver of business impact and should be appreciated alongside PR and external comms and marketing and all the other fun stuff. So, and also I will talk at length about that on LinkedIn.
Jen?
Did you say Jen? And I'm like,
hmm Yeah.
what? Okay, great, Jen. Well, I'm Jen George. Hi, everybody. I'm winding down a full-time run actually as a chief comms officer at the Aspen Group, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a large PE-backed healthcare portfolio company here in the US. And I'm doing that in a consulting capacity while I help find my replacement. So I'm sort of in this really interesting place, right? Like sort of half in, half out, but also gives me a really interesting vantage point on all of this work. And on top of that, I moved to Abu Dhabi in February. And if you were paying attention to the news, which I know all of you were in February, let's just say it was a very interesting month to relocate to the UAE. My husband works for the National Media Authority here, so we made the leap as a family with our two kids. And yeah, I would call myself a corporate communications nerd. Like the reputation work, the whole mess of it. I write a daily newsletter about it, the CCO Dispatch. So please subscribe if you haven't already. And I can't wait to get into all of the meat of this conversation because there's so much to unpack today. And we've got an amazing lineup.
Well, Jen, as I said to you when you first moved, either you Abu Dhabi do or you Abu Dhabi don't.
Oh my God.
So good.
Any other cliches
It's
we
actually
work into this
Keith's stand-up
conversation this
hour.
morning?
Yeah. I'll do mine quick. Meredith Klein. I write Meredith in the Media. It's a Substack about media news and exclusive journalist interviews on what's driving their coverage. Come from a 20-year comms background at major brands like Golan, Pinterest, and Walmart, and excited to be here. So thank you, Dustin, Jen, and Keith.
So the first thing I want to talk about is the Wall Street Journal article that everyone was mostly praising, and I say mostly because we have one person who wasn't, called Keith. And what I found most interesting was, I don't follow, I am a communications nerd, but because I run my own company, I have to also be like an accounting nerd and a finance nerd and all the other things. So I was really interested in Keith's perspective, which was essentially, yay, publicists are storming, according to the Wall Street Journal, the C-suite. What is the actual percentage of companies that have it? And I think you, as you put it in your post, Keith, just because a few companies out of Silicon Valley are respecting the position doesn't mean it's actually being respected in the way that we think it should be. So I'd like to first talk about that because that got so much attention and so much praise. And as per the norm, Keith, you were sort of the one intelligent sticking point on that one. So I'd like you to dive into that and then have Jen talk about the unfunded mandate aspect. And then Meredith talk about what you're seeing from the media side of that conversation.
Yeah, so intelligent, I'm a little taken aback by that because how dare you call me intelligent, Dustin? Um, I took exception to the fact that that article basically took a very small sampling of people and blew it into, oh my God, this is happening industry wide, and this is such a great thing, and the publicists are taking over the
Mhm.
C-suite. I was like, no, that's even in the article. It cited data that basically contradicted its own narrative, where and I'm looking at the post right now. It said, basically what I said was one article, a trend doth not make, almost half, because it said like almost half of CCOs are part of a C-suite, almost half, a majority doth not make, and a handful of companies highlighting and paying well one senior leadership position, a trend doth not make, and recognition doth not make, because you've got companies like Netflix and Anthropic, and yes, the eye-watering salaries that they're throwing at their CCOs, that's great. But what about all the people who need to support that CCO? Because for those of us who are a one-person team, it is overwhelming to be a one-person team. You need to have a well-staffed comms team and a well-supported comms team to be able to do that. And so until you have that support within an organization across the board and not just at companies that have the marquee names like Netflix and Anthropic, it's just, oh, hey, I saw, you know, Taylor Swift is doing her wedding at Madison Square Garden, and now it's the trend to get all these public places and have your wedding in public places. No, one person doing this doesn't mean it's a trend. Even in the article, and I'm looking down because I'm referencing the article itself, only 33% of CCOs felt well equipped, including having enough budget to do their roles, and only 34, that's about a third, said that they were happy with their workload, and that's notable because that's down year over year from 52%. So you had a double-digit drop in the number of CCOs who are happy with their workload, meaning they are overburdened with the amount of work and responsibility that they have. So again, it's great that a few CCOs are getting their due, but just because it's happening at those marquee named companies and those singular people are getting the salaries that I wish that I had, that doesn't mean that the communications function in general is having a renaissance. When we get to the point where comms company or comms functions within companies across the board are well funded, well equipped, well represented in the C-suite, and also feel like they are getting their due across the board and not just at, a couple companies sprinkled through San Francisco, LA, and New York. Then we're going to have the comms renaissance. Until then, I'm not holding my breath because I've heard this story before and it's never actually come to pass.
Yeah,
I
Keith.
will step down from my soapbox now.
No, I want to like give you so many virtual high fives. I will also say Keith did publish first, but I wholeheartedly agreed with him after the piece came out. Because look, like, yeah, almost half of CCOs report to the CEO now, which is great, but that also means over half don't. And so waiting for your company to decide you deserve a seat at at the table is a losing strategy because plenty of companies are never going to hand it to you. You have to act like you're already in the room and make it awkward for them to disagree or also show the business case of why it would be, a bad decision. Um, when I looked at the piece, way down at the bottom around resourcing, this is effectively an unfunded mandate, right? Companies are handing communications leaders more responsibility, strategy, AI transformation, culture, brand, all within our remit. But without the budget, without the headcount, without the resourcing that should come with it in a responsible environment. And if you look at, as Keith said, almost half of comms leaders, had their funding cut this year. In the same year, they're being told the job matters more than it ever has. So, I'm glad that we are, as a collective, right, celebrating the seat at the table. I would rather people notice that a seat with no budget attached, though, is a company asking you to solve a harder problem with the same resources and expecting you to say thank you for the opportunity,
Well,
right? Um,
Ben, I'm only interrupting. That is the best line we're probably going to have in this entire conversation, is what you just said. because what you just said is exactly right. Say it again so we don't forget it.
God, what
What
did
did
I
you say?
say?
You
It
said
was so good.
you said a company that expects someone to do
Yeah.
more work without resources and say thank you for that
You're supposed
is
to say thank you so much for this opportunity,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
that's right. So I'm
But
sorry to
it's
interrupt. That was such a
no,
good
but
line. I want
yeah.
to.
but look,
Yes.
an unfunded mandate is not a compliment in my opinion. It's a I love these I love these like billing metaphors, but it is basically a bill that hasn't been paid yet. It's a debt. So if you're going to be pushy about getting the seat, which we should be just as pushy about naming this out loud. Don't let like, oh, you're strategic now pass without following it up with, okay, and so what is the budget that comes with this? And here's what I actually am going to need in order to solve the very real business
Mhm.
challenges ahead of us.
Well, and for
Mhm.
that unfunded mandate portion of it, like I see so much money being thrown at marketing departments and ad departments because they can translate into
AI
metrics like
tokens.
and yeah, and AI tokens because they're like, oh, that translates into CPM or that translates into, share of voice or brand or something like that. One of
Yeah.
the things, especially with internal comms, is that we don't have a lot of direct metrics that we can do for impact. Like internal comms, it's been joked about, we run on vibes. And yes, for PR, there's a little bit more that you get into some of the metrics that you can translate into actual business. But because we are non direct revenue generating functions, we are not appreciated as much as marketing. And then we're also first on the chopping block when budget cuts come because it's like, oh, comms doesn't translate to direct revenue in the bottom line. We can just get rid of them. And it's like, no, we do so much. We just, again, it's that unfunded mandate. And hey, thanks for doing this great job. We're going to lay you off now because you don't contribute to the CFO's Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. I think the thing is too, so I agree with you both. I would say I'm gonna give like two sides of like that coin, where on the one hand, I would say anytime the big companies like a Yahoo or an Anthropic
Right.
or an OpenAI do anything, it does make folks take notice. So if you think about just like the work from home thing, the second Amazon and JP Morgan announced like no more work from home, literally everyone, big, small, medium, in between, was like, fudge, we're all going back to work. So I would say my silver lining, because I'm an optimist, is like, even though I completely agree with you and the data doesn't lie, and I agree, like, like don't take more and say thank you. Might this be the example that companies take to their boss and be like, hey, you've got Yahoo and Anthropic and all these brands,
Mhm.
like, do like this is what it is. So I remember when I was in house and I had a comms officer who was like, I need the chief comms officer title because this is what my peers are doing. This is what I have to. That has become more and more popular. I think even in the example, Hinge was like, no, no, no. I'm being both, right? Like I'm getting this title. So I do think there's maybe a glimmer where it's like the article helps because it's the Wall Street Journal using big brands that are doing this, but I agree it's absolutely not representative. On the other side, I also think it's something where we can use this as an example to say like where actually do we need to come through. So I've always unfortunately reported it into a CMO versus a CEO, right? And that can be really difficult. So what does the money actually look like? That brings us to a whole nother conversation of, well, what does the media landscape look like, right? Keith, you were just talking about where do we show our KPIs and metrics. It's always been bucketed in media relations, earned media. Show me the coverage, show me the coverage. We have yet to, even though we've evolved past media into public affairs, into narrative writing, into internal comms, we still get brought from the communications bubble down to the PR bubble, which is largely media, which is why you get the less dollars because there is an expectation for earned, whereas marketing always owns that paid bucket. So for me, this kind of raised 1,000 different things, right? And I'm like, God, this is like the age old, like, what's the role of comms? So I think it's helpful that we can use. Hey, Wall Street Journal is really credible. They're making a trend out of four people, but hey, they're really big brands and maybe we could use this. But also to Keith's point and Jen's point on what does this actually mean and where do we actually need to come up with the rallying cry and get folks behind that that's more majorative.
Yeah.
So I'm going to break the 2-second rule for the second time in 10 minutes. I apologize. Usually I'm supposed to be quiet and let the guests talk, but I want to zero this in. There's a lot of people in the comments who are echoing what all three of you are saying. So let's bring this into a lesson. how do you push? How do you prove that value? Because there was a survey by Weber Shandwick a year and a half ago of international CEOs showing that I want to say it's 72% of these CEOs felt that their comms teams were well prepared for the three crises they were most afraid of, which was political attacks, terrorists, and wars, I think, were and this was pre-tariff. So those are the big three. And most majority of CEOs felt that their comms team who were capable and prepared to handle these crises. There was the big article by what's her name at Axios 2 years ago that led to a lot of conversation based on a study. It does seem like the CCO is getting more attention. So how do we take that from a comm? Stephanie Roberts talked about this. There's a big transition in your career when you go from saying, ooh, let me read about comms as a comms person to, ooh, let me read about business. Let me understand the C-suite so I can push my way into that room. So again, we have a lot of people agreeing with you also. How do we turn this into an actual solution for the people watching, whether they're trying to rise up, going to an organization, or they're looking for a job at a senior comms level?
Look, putting more coffee machines in the break room to well caffeinate your comms team is not going to power them. We actually need the resources, we actually need the budget, and we need the headcount. And I think I was able to make some arguments in past roles for expanding the comms team, even the internal comms team, by kind of mapping out week hour workload and saying, this takes us this amount of time, this takes us this amount of time. You're asking us to add on top of this. Me and all of my people are already working 55 to 60-hour work weeks, and you want more on top of that. We need people to be able to do this. We need people to be able to push the function forward, because right now, this is the amount of work that we're putting in simply to tread water. If you want us to evolve this function and be proactive and attack all these things that you want us to attack, and make sure that we are serving our constituency the way that you want us to, we need to have more budget, we need to have more headcount, and we need to reduce this hour work per week workload right now, because me and my people are all burning out. We are burning the candle at both ends, and this is not sustainable. And if you don't want me to have to deal with layoff, or to deal with quitting in addition to not being able to meet the demands being put on my team, you have to fund us and staff us appropriately and give us the tools to be able to do it. Marketing has 16 different tools, and you're giving them at this point, you're giving them all the AI budget to be able to go out and do all the AI stuff. What about comms? We need us to have the appropriate tools as well. I can name you 6 different tools that would do better than SharePoint as far as an intranet goes, or better than Outlook as far as distributing emails to our employees, but you want us to run on whatever's free as part of the M365 package.
Yes, but also I think we need to own this. This is on us, right? As a collective. I think we can't just complain that we're not getting attention and budget. We need to own this ourselves. The way I think about it is we have to tie ourselves to irreversible business decisions, not just outputs like emails we send to teams, or like press releases, right? Big M&A, market entry or exit, like restructuring. These are the moments in my experience, right, where a CEO learns whether or not you're in the room helping them decide, or you're just downstream sending out the press release announcing the acquisition. And so if you can, so that's number one. The other way I think about it, and I said this to somebody recently, like we have to speak the C-suite's language, which is not just like reputation matters and like internal comms matters, which is all true, but it's really around like downside protection and upside optionality, right? A strong reputation means you can move faster, you can take risks a competitor can't, you can enter new markets. A damaged one means every decision is going to get scrutinized in ways that aren't always fair, right? And that becomes a business argument, not a comms argument. And I think that's where we need to start to shift our conversations as communicators around. The other thing that Meredith, you said a minute ago, which I thought was such a really important point, which is we also need to, when it comes to measurement, the best work comms teams often do is invisible. the story that never becomes a scandal, right? Or like
Mhm.
the regulator that gave you the benefit of the doubt. But invisible doesn't have to mean hidden or unspoken, right? Like one of the things we do is we track every single inbound, issue that comes through, whether we see that in social listening or in other places. And we report on that on a monthly basis. And so we're telling our leaders what didn't happen and why on a cadence, on a rhythm, not as like a war story, like 10 months later. That is how you, I think, in my experience, how you can turn a CEO's gut feeling that you're valuable into, budget, resources, headcount, actual numbers moving in the right direction, the way that, the half percentage of, CEOs or CCOs did in the Wall Street Journal piece. But I think we have to own these conversations ourselves. We have to be sort of the drivers of our own destiny.
Yeah. It reminds me of like everyone's a communications professional until you have to do communications, right? So
Totally.
like realistically, like we're all good writers. Dustin's probably the best writer, right? That's why he focuses on that. So we'll all say we're good writers, but like he actually that's like what he does. And I think that comes together with communications because everyone knows how to do comms. Just get 5 placements, just get this. Why wouldn't the Wall Street Journal pick that up? Oh, just I think where we need to focus are on like the business impact. So I wrote down 3 things as Keith and Jen were talking. One, the cost of a crisis. My biggest thing has always been like, you're literally like, if you do this, this could happen, right? So, like in all of my comms plans, I always did a scenario planning, a leak scenario. Here's a leak that could happen. How would we react to that? Like, what's the triage from that? You mentioned social listening, huge on that. That's more important than ever. That's why I kind of think, either marketing or comms kind of own social listening, but it have to be really compared because what people are saying that needs to be quickly brought back to the team. So I always think of it in like you've got like 2 audiences, right? Like you've got your consumer customer and then you got your investor audience, right? So the investor audience doesn't care if, we don't love, the burger or this is happening or whatever else from the consumer. They care if the stock's going up or down. So you might get a lot of chatter on social media, but the stock's going up. Now I'm actually specifically talking about McDonald's because everyone talked about the McBlooper and consumers went ham on it, but actually the stock stayed and went really well and everything was fine. So the 2 audiences there, as a communications professional, you have to be able to say, here's what consumers are saying. We're the laughing stock right now. Investors don't care because the big arch is making big money, right? So where do we kind of meet in the middle and like how do we react to that? And then the third most important thing is obviously the business impact. So Godfrey from Off the Record always talks about like, I'm gonna botch it, but she's like, I'm a business person that does communications, right? Like she's like, communications
Amen.
is what I do, but I'm doing it for the business, right? So
Yeah.
the business impact, oftentimes we're sending, here's the articles, here's the coverage, here's what we're gonna do for the launch. We're often shushed a little bit more when it comes to how is this going to impact the business? What's going to happen with a crisis? Now, it's not saying go with a little red flag and say, if you do that, this can happen, but be able to say, here are the business implications in the media should this go awry, right? This might happen. This might happen. Here's how we're going to handle it. What makes the most sense for our audiences? And I think if we make ourselves more business savvy and talking about the business and we're just communicating the business versus being the PR team, I think that's a critical step. And that's not new and revelatory. I didn't just come up with that. We've talked about that forever, but we still get bucketed into that like media bucket versus business bucket.
Yes, and
Sorry,
sorry, Jen. 2 things. One is, and I was also taking notes because, Meredith was like, I took notes. I'm like, yes, that's a great idea. So I don't forget anything. We have to make sure that our business value as far as communicators and the expertise that we bring to the table is recognized. Like one of the things that I've often said is no one's going into the CFO's office and redlining and changing their Excel spreadsheet. No one's going to the CTO and telling them, no, you can't do that tech stack because we don't like the way that's going to be built. But yet everybody comes to us and redlines the hell out of all of our documents and all of our strategy plans and is like, I can do this better because I can put fingers to keyboard. And the other thing that I say about that is just because I can put gas in my car doesn't make me a mechanic. Just because you can put fingers to keyboard, it doesn't make you a communicator. There's a lot of expertise. Get anything. there's expertise and there's all kinds of skill and background that we have and education that we have and experience we have that lends itself well to us being able to bring that to the table and say, this is what's going to happen if this happens, and we can plan for that. Like Meredith said, with the scenario planning, like we're averting this, we're averting that. Please let us demonstrate our expertise and how we express ourselves in this. The other issue that I have is CEOs especially have ADHD as far as what the new thing with comms is. It's like, oh my God, I heard that LLMs are scouring Reddit. We got to be on Reddit, and that's like your big push for the week is get your company on Reddit. And then the next week it's going to be the next site and the next site and the next site and the next site. And oh, we've got to be in, PR week this week and the Wall Street Journal next week. We need to be able to set strategic plans and be able to set long-term goals, just like companies do for strategy, and do that for comms, and be able to rein in CEOs and CXOs to be able to keep them on track so that, yes, while we have some things that are responsive to the squirrel of the week, we still have that overarching plan as far as we are where we need to be and we are addressing the audiences that need to be addressed in the ways that they need to be addressed.
And I want to point to Jen for a moment because Joe Gallo pointed out to one of your earlier comments, Jenny. She said it's not just about proving business impact to get there; it's counseling, look around the corners they aren't looking for. We're often more well read across an industry that C-level executives will give you see the forest, not the trees. So again, let's. I want to wrap up on this part of the conversation. There's other topics we need to get to, but I do want to ask you, Jen, to talk about how you peer around corners. Because to Keith's point, there's always going to be a new social media thing. There's always going to be a new trend. And we often tell our clients, and we're not working with corporations most of the time, but we tell our clients, that sounded good, but you botched the messaging, you botched the author, you're botching your targets. And again, we're in PR, so we're in limited scope here in my agency. But we often have to tell even communications professionals, you've botched the narrative here. You're not looking forward the right way. And they trust us because, for example, and I shared 2 pieces in the comments, everybody, in response to Meredith's point about crisis comms, bottom line planning. There's a great Southwest example from a few years ago where the Catholic Church, I'm Catholic, matched with the Catholic Church had listened to the comms people and let's be transparent about clergy abuse instead of hiding it for 40 years. But also, Jen, how do you show that seeing around corners isn't just hey, we want more budget, but actually this is the risk, or more importantly, this is the opportunity that is there from a bottom line impact. So I want to wrap up this part of the conversation with Jen here, and then we'll get to a couple of other topics.
It's a great question. I think in my experience, and I'm sure we've all experienced this at some point, but like we tend to scan. We're like, oh, I'm going to do my media monitoring this morning. I'm going to scan the comms news, and then I'm going to scan business news, and then I'm going to scan political news. What I have found, certainly in the CCO dispatch, is that those corner cases tend to show up in the like gaps between each of those verticals. And one of the things what I love to do actually is when I'm looking at a story, I think about, okay, where was this CEO before here? Like, what are the regulatory impacts I'm seeing, outside? Are there capital markets issues that could collide with this? And that's literally the mechanism, I think, behind a lot of the work that I do with the dispatch is like asking, like, where else does this apply, instead of treating it as a one-off that I saw in my specific vertical. I also think you've got, where you have to sort of think about is, you have to build like a really deliberately weird sensing network, like not just the PR trades and business press, but like look in SEC filing trackers in court, even in court dockets, like some of the work you may not even realize is going to impact your business is in labor beat reporter, writings, or like niche regulatory filings, right? Who are seeing things maybe months before they hit mainstream coverage. And so I think the people who are able to look around those corners usually aren't reading more news necessarily than everybody else, but they're reading different news than everybody else. And so I think, the fastest way to turn like hindsight you already have into foresight is looking at sort of overlapping areas where you think there's probably going to be like some of those gaps, some of those corner stories.
So that makes sense. So Alex Dudley was on the show a couple weeks ago, and he said so
Oh, I
many
love
comms
Alex.
people say, yeah, he's great. He goes, everyone says I'm not good at math. And he goes, and it is absolutely denigrating to the function to
I
say
agree.
that because then everyone just says, oh, you're not good at math. You can't understand finance. You can't understand all the things that everyone else is thinking about. So yeah, so let's step to another topic because we could do 6 hours on this particular one. But Meredith, I want to go over to you because Meredith and the media. Obviously, everyone talks about these different trends, and usually, like one trade outlet reporter put it, the Wall Street Journal reports on things that the trade outlets were reporting on a year ago, right, as real trends.
Yeah.
I'd like to look at you, Meredith, from both the external comms, but also the fact that internal comms becomes external comms today, no matter what, because of access to information and employees feeling either empowered or frustrated to do what they want to do, regardless of consequences. How are you seeing the media landscape shifting over the next 6 months to a year, where comms leader, whether internal or external, can look and say, boy, this is going to be a risk, and I need to start making the C-suite aware of it now, or an opportunity that is coming down the pike?
hmm Yeah, I think one thing, Nicole Ramirez wrote a really great article
Oh,
in Inc.
yes.
And she talked about, let me pull up of course, I've got 17 tabs. Nicole Ramirez in Inc. C-suite executives
I've
are the
got it.
next creators. Yeah. So Dustin will drop that in the link. That was a really great piece. And what she talks about is a can recap saying, wow, these panels were really scripted, really boring, really safe. Now, as PR people, it's our, responsibility to protect the brand. But the shift, the around the corner that's coming, the CEO has always been a personality, right? Like they've always been a face of the brand, they've always been a personality. It's just the way they do it is shifting because the audience wants something different. They don't want the, safe sitting at the desk. Here's the result of the earnings
Mhm.
announcements anymore. Like we've got to elevate it a little bit more. They want people to be vulnerable. They want people to have the, insight and information. I just interviewed Meg Graham from Wall Street Journal CMO today, and she said everyone plays it so safe. And she says that to Jen's point, she's actually digging through earnings to find that diamond in the rough where that she can then bring onto it. And she said, I wish the PR people would have given me that in advance. They can't, right, like with the earnings script, but I wish people would have given me that or leaned into, this didn't work and here's what we're doing, or like this is a strategy we took and here's how we're pivoting, because that's interesting and that's actually helpful to others, right? And no one wants to do that. Everyone's like, here's what we did, and they try to highlight the best metrics, and then the earnings reports are bad because the media is actually looking at the things that they want to cover, and then the CEO is like, why do we get bad headlines when we focus on this? Because you let your PR team try to re-narrative over something versus saying like, hey, growth was high, but numbers were low here, and this is what we're focused on. So I think what's going to happen is more and more CEOs over the past few years have gone on to video. Good, bad, and ugly, all of the above. You are going to see more CEOs become in this creator persona where it's not professional video, suit, scripted, sitting in front doing it. You're going to get the Richard Dixons like walking with his cool Gap stuff with a mini mic, walking down whatever else. You're going to get more of a selfie video of, John Furner, like having a conversation, and you feel like you're in the room with them, getting to really know them versus behind the scenes scripted. Okay, take five, we're going to do this. And that's what media want. I mean, the media want that. And, they're trying to find those stories anyway. So it's going to be harder to get those fluffy messages through because they're looking for the actual stories that are going to resonate. This is not new. This is never, this has always been the case, but more so now because so many different creator journalists or creator platforms are coming out and talking about it. They're going to have the same humanistic means there.
Heavy plus one on that, and enjoying the product from the McDonald's perspective, I think kind of strikes on that one. Especially one thing that I will bring up is I think it was in the Axios recap of Cannes, like they said the word authenticity was overplayed and it just became hollow. I think we need to translate that to human, and I think we need to translate that to just real. Because for me, one of the things that I typically try and build on for a metric is trust. Building trust from a senior executive, especially down through an organization, but also through the media, that is what your currency is. Communications and engagement runs on trust. It is the easiest thing to spend and it is the hardest thing to earn. So I think being human, being real is what's going to earn you that trust. So it will help you get over those humps of the numbers were bad if you're upfront and honest about it. Because if you try and cover that up with a fluffy narrative, like you said, Meredith, people are going to see right through that. And people are going to be like, why are they trying to counteract this narrative? Why are they trying to paper over this? This is ridiculous. We all know it. It's out there. Just trying to speak against it is not going to work for people, especially in an executive position, especially in the media.
Mhm.
Yes, and I think there's also different, even within trust and even within authenticity, as like these very broad terms, there are nuances, right? Because there's some research out, I think maybe it was last month or a couple weeks ago, Pray Tell and YouGov, and on parasocial trust. And it basically found that to both of your points, like unpolished, like very human personalities have become what they are referring to as like the ultimate unit of trust, right? Like kind of rough around the edges, like we say authenticity, but raw, unfiltered, right? But this, what I thought was so interesting is the same study found that traditional media is still the most trusted source in like every market. So we've basically got these two like trust economies running side by side, and they don't always convert into each other. Like we were talking earlier about Ryan Cohen at GameStop, right? He's got this massive trust that he's built through that unvarnished, rough around the edges, right? Like with his retail fan base. But that does not convert when he's talking, when he's like trying to, pitch a purchase of eBay, right? Who rejected his bid outright. So you sort of have to know, even within that broad umbrella of authenticity and trust, you have to know which room you're actually standing in and deciding to articulate a trust platform before you even decide what does trust look like in this space with this particular audience.
Mhm.
Yes.
I just, oh,
Sorry. I was just going to say with the Ryan Cohen example, like I took to LinkedIn and basically was like, he did not make the case for this at all on a CNBC interview. And it was interesting because shout out to Steve Dowling and Craig Carroll on the Communications Breakdown podcast. Like when GameStop came out with their next quarterly earnings, one of them said like they kind of made the financial case for this, that GameStop is growing and they could actually do this. But Ryan Cohen did himself no favors with presenting it that way to the CNBC audience. He didn't know his audience. He thought that bringing his Reddit crowd game would be enough to cover everyone, and he didn't read the room.
Well, I think also someone pointed out, Nicole, a different Nicole than Nicole Ramirez, pointed out that he also was kind of giving a middle finger to CNBC
Yeah,
in that
he
interview
was.
because
Well, yeah, there
Specifically
was
to Aaron
that.
Ross Sorkin. Yeah,
what's that?
I said, and specifically to Aaron Ross Sorkin.
Okay, again, I never heard of this guy until the interview controversy arose, but there was an intentional middle finger. And as you said, Keith, you looked at the room and said, there's actually a financial impact here versus just, oh, he did a bad interview. And that's where that shift in
Just me, or did we lose Dustin?
I thought so too.
he
Yeah.
froze for a second. Oh, he's back.
Nope, he's back. Hooray!
Sorry, folks. I'll drop my video and let my system recharge. I do want to point out, we talk about authenticity, Keith, and also Jen, you mentioned the trust factor, which room you're in. But also, isn't there a question of what is the trust that you want to build? What kind of trust with the audience? Who's the right person for it? And then are they in the right room? There's really things to be four questions that you have to ask and answer. And so I'd be interested, Keith and Jen from the internal versus external comms, and then Meredith, kind of different vertical analyses that you're doing. Because again, from the PR side, the stutterer probably shouldn't be on, live TV with a microphone jammed in their face. The arrogant person should probably not do a long-standing interview because their arrogance is going to come off too strongly.
Hmm.
So I'd be very interested in the internal comms, external, and the media perspective on how to build trust the right way with the right people, the right audiences in the right room.
I mean, yeah, that kind of is part of the communications advice that people need to take. The question is whether or not we have that credibility with those senior leaders for them to take the advice. Like, was there a communicator telling Ryan Cohen, like, you should not go on a national or international cable show and give the middle finger to Andrew Ross Sorkin and do that kind of an interview? And if that communicator actually had the credibility to say that to Ryan Cohen, did Ryan be like, no, I'm just going to do what I want? So again, it's kind of that, yes, the CCO is in the C-suite. Are they actually being heard? Are they actually being given that role as strategic advisor, or is it just I'm going to do what I want and whatever? I think there are certain things that you have to take into account from an internal perspective as far as culture goes. Obviously, the CEO dictates a good amount of what culture looks like in a company, and it cascades down. You just have to make sure that what you're doing is in line with that culture, because if you color outside the lines too much, then it becomes kind of a, well, what just happened? Like, this person just took a screaming left turn into somewhere that we've never been, and I'm not quite sure how to feel about this, and it doesn't resonate because it's not in line with what I'm used to. But also, if it is in line, then go with it. But the communicator and the communications team needs to know what the landscape is and needs to be heard when we say things like, this is not going to play well in this audience. Please take our advice and please do these kinds of things. I know you've got personal beef, but what are you trying to accomplish here? And know that this is not your typical audience.
I think not to get like academic and theoretical, but I
Well,
usually
please do.
I need a little chalkboard behind me. I think trust, we could break it down to so many little buckets here, but I think of it as like three separate things. And I think a lot of confusion happens because people lump them together into like a vibe. I think first is trust of judgment, which is, do I believe this person's, like, do they have experience? Do they have the track record to actually be right, not just confident? Like, I think without that, you're just hoping, right? You're not really trusting somebody. I think the second piece is around motive, which is, do I believe they're actually looking out for me as, my CEO or my leader or my manager? Or are you just using me to get what you want? For a company, that's the integrity question, right? Like, are you actually considering the customer's interest, or is this just like, are you just performing that? And then I think the third is around delivery, which is, are they consistent? Do they follow through over time? I think that is the piece a lot of corporations and executives have been struggling with as of late, which is, they said some things a few months ago, a few years ago, and they have flip-flopped on it. They've built, if you've built a real track record of something, one mistake isn't going to completely wipe it out. But I think we have been seeing a consistent erosion of that trust around consistency, delivery over time, and it's now compounding in the background for a lot of these organizations. You think about Apple, you think about Target, right? And then it becomes, I think a real business deterrent. And I think it matters a lot because I think a lot of execs right now, we talked about the authenticity piece, like, they're working overtime to seem relatable and authentic and well-intentioned. And that's, I think that's great, but we also need to make sure that they are also consistent. Is their judgment holding up under pressure, right? Or when delivering when it counts, right? And that's a fragile, very different type of trust. And so from my point of view, again, not to get too philosophical and intellectual here, but I think building trust the right way isn't just picking the one dimension that's easiest, but making sure all three of them are working together and are true at the same time. I think that's where the real test comes in for executives and corporations, alike.
Say and do, don't just say.
Yeah.
Exactly.
From a media perspective, I think that comms folks need to be strategic about the channel to put CEOs on. So if you think about it, like, it's like, start with like, what is the message? Okay. Yeah. And then and what's the best way to tell it? So if the CEO is like super emotional, don't do a video or a podcast. right? Like if they're super like short-winded, not a lot of color, put them on broadcast. It's 4 to 7 minutes, and they're literally just going to hit like the messages and not elaborate or go off, right? Like I would actually use, and this is like an older one, like not to keep going back to the McDonald's and the GameStop, but like I remember when Linda Yaccarino was CEO at X, and she went on the stage with Julia Borsten. Oh my God, she was grilled, and Linda Yaccarino was so defensive, and there was such a tension there, but she was stuck on that stage. I can only imagine how bright that spotlight was shining. And Julia Borsten from CNBC is such a professional, and she kind of stayed the course and was asking the questions. But if I was the PR person in the crowd, I would be like, God, pull the curtain down immediately. Now, she was blindsided because Elon had made a decision she wasn't aware, she wasn't part of, and that was the question. And then she couldn't kind of bridge herself out of that. But these are the types of things, like maybe she should have been pulled from that onstage presentation, right? Like you have to understand, like in the day's news cycle, right? Where is your executive? Where are they in their headspace? How are they reacting to that? I've worked with some incredibly cool and calm executives. I've worked with some incredibly hot-headed executives, right? Like you have to understand which format to push and pull them off of, right? If a situation goes on, everyone, all the media want to interview them, cherry pick which ones they're going to either like based on like the reporter persona versus the channel that they're going to be good on, right? Because the trust comes through. You can feel someone's emotion. You can feel if someone's nervous. You can feel if someone's defensive. You can feel if someone's hiding something, right? We don't have to be body language experts to understand if someone's skirting the issue, right? We all know like the look to the left or whatever. But I think as looking around the corner and seeing some of the mishaps from GameStop, from McDonald's, from Linda Yaccarino, we are in control over what format they're going on and they're saying, and we have to base that off of knowing them and how they handle crises under pressure.
And by the way, that also builds credibility for the comms industry. Like when you are protecting your principal and you're protecting your exec and you're like, actually, I'm not going to put, you've got lipstick on your chin or let me fix this for you. Like that seems like such a small thing, but it goes such a long way in helping your principal feel protected and taken care of. And like you're there, consigliere, right? There to help kind of make sure that they're positioned in the right way.
Talking about what Jen, I think you mentioned earlier, some of the best PR is the one that you don't see. That is an instance where you would have said, hey, you're not going on CNBC. I don't care if it's Andrew Ross Sorkin. That's actually worse. I don't want you to do that, right? And it's marketing's like, but that's CNBC, and how are you going to hit your KPIs?
All press is good press, Meredith.
No. Au contraire, we don't need CNBC for this situation. We don't want him to go on with Andrew. And this is where here's what can happen. Here's the business impact. Here's the cost of a crisis if you really botch this, right? Like, and here's what we should do and why. And it's going to be hard, and you're going to get a lot of, like side, why would we not do CNBC? Whew. Don't even worry about the education for marketing and everyone else at that point. Focus on the CEO. And it's like, I'm telling you, the reason why we don't want to do this is A, B, C, D, E. The stock impact could go down. Investors could get wary. All of a sudden, we could be in a complete turnaround situation where now we're having to triage what you said on CNBC because he hit you with a zinger and you didn't know how to answer it. Don't do that.
Heavy +1 on that, Meredith. And because I've been keeping an eye on the comments, Joe Gallo had asked me a question about why not? Why should we keep an eye on our audiences and make sure that the right delivery is going to the right audience and the right channel? Meredith, you just nailed it. I couldn't have said it better than you just said.
How do I see the comments? I love Joe. Hi, Joe.
I know. I want to see the comments too. I
just pulled up the LinkedIn Live page and just been hitting reload.
Well, if I'm ignoring people, my apologies.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Unfortunately, you all had so much good things to say. I haven't brought as many questions as I'd like to. And I don't think we're actually going to be able to get to AI by the end of the hour. Kind of thank God, because everyone else talks about that. But I do want to dial into something very quickly. A lot of, I think, comms professionals that I have met, and I've only been in the sort of wider comms world for 2.5 years, but I've met a lot of people through the show and other, basically through LinkedIn. And it does seem like a lot of communications professionals, they rise to an executive level or near executive level, and they get really, really intimidated because now they have to translate. They have to do the Stephanie Roberts point of reading about comms to reading about business, and they don't know how to make that transition. So I'm going to suggest, I'm going to use a recent case study where we were sitting down with a full client. We hadn't worked with them in almost 6 years. They have a new executive team. They have 50 employees. So this is not a corporation, but this is a company doing quite a bit. They're a financial lender. I'm a math nerd posing as a PR professional, so I was having a great time. But I didn't have to say that much because in the meeting, they said a few things. And so I looked at their director of sales and I said, well, how is this, this, and this impacted the number of customers, potential customers coming through your pipeline and wanting to sign with you? And I thought that was a very basic question from the other points that had been raised by their executive leadership team. And the CEO looked and said, that's a really good question. I thought it was pretty basic. But by asking questions on the front end, whether it's a campaign or an agency or at the beginning of the year, if you're in-house, you can ask those kinds of questions early to show that you're following what's going on, one. And then two, we established early that the CEO should not do the greatest number of op-eds in the campaign, it should be the CFO, because it's a lender trying to make their investors happy. But because the CFO is very withdrawn and very numbers heavy, the CEO should actually be doing the greater number of interviews. So very early on in the discussion, we established credibility by asking the right questions, which gave us the ability to say, based on your goals, we should change up who's going to be on what platform and why. So I think you don't have to wait until those decisions are made to try to course correct. But early on, you can earn that
never
trust.
wait. Yeah.
Well, sure. But I just mean, if you're intimidated about, because I don't know how to read a financial report, you don't have to right away. Baby steps. Ask the right questions and try to have those conversations 6 months before the big things are happening. And the more you can do that, you'll learn as you go how to translate and how to coordinate and create those Venn diagrams.
I actually think the problem, well, I don't know. I think the problem might be literacy more than confidence or insecurity. Like I think a lot of us came up writing, messaging, handling, pitching media, making media lists. Nobody trained us on what does EBITDA mean? Like
Well,
that
that's
was
the point.
part of our
Right, exactly. Right,
So
right.
you get in the room with the
Right,
CEO and they're
you
talking
have
and
to
it's like a
learn it.
different language. That's not
Asking the
that
questions. You get to
it,
belong in the room without having known what EBITDA is yet. But you ask those questions, you earn that trust. While on the side, you're starting to learn those things. And so a few months down the road, then you can talk intelligently about those things. As well, the boss said EBITDA. Let me ask a smart question while I look really quickly at my computer on the Zoom call to see what that actually means. It gives you a lot of bandwidth, I think, on the actual knowledge while also earning trust that you're paying attention. That's all I meant, Jen.
no. I'm with you. I think the practical advice for folks is like go out and get that literacy deliberately if you can't like ask to sit in on earnings prep, ask your
Yeah,
CFO
great point.
or whatever to like
Yes,
walk you through the P&L, like what is driving the business, like what drives your revenue number,
yeah,
and
great
then
point.
that way you're closing the gap, but then you can ask the questions to your point, Dustin, that maybe other people aren't asking. You just get smarter, and then you start to
Yes,
you can
brilliant.
build out a comm strategy that is mapped back to the business strategy that goes all the way back to our
Perfect.
the first topic of this conversation.
That was exactly right, Jen. Well put. So I want to close. Well, I feel bad. I interrupted her, I think, for the third time. I was supposed to do a 2 second rule, but really, I guess like 0.2 seconds for me. So I want to close on the topic that Linda asked 40 minutes ago. Are you seeing more CEOs focus on internal during this time, given the geopolitical environment? Are some pulling back on external to pivot to internal comms? And is that an opportunity to showcase the value of internal comms? And Keith, Jen, Meredith, in that order, let's just kind of wrap up on this topic of is internal comms being given a chance, given that employees are seen as the most, typically seen as the most valuable audience by the smartest CEOs, and does it make sense that given that anything can leak internal to external, that focusing on internal comms is being given a sort of a spotlight potential? I don't, but given a lack of big jumping up and down from Keith, maybe the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I feel like a lot of CEOs are not addressing everything that's going on in the world because number one, we are moving at warp speed and the news cycle changes every single day. There's something else to respond to pretty much every single day. And you don't want a CEO to have to send out messages on a daily, if not weekly basis about, well, this is happening and this is happening and this is happening. I think it's also a bit of a lightning rod because no matter what you're gonna say, there's going to be people who disagree with you, and especially in the US right now, people feel like they have license to be able to speak out and speak publicly about their personal views. And, I've seen people email the CEO back and say things that I was like, wow, that takes some serious chutzpah to be able to do that. Um, so I think CEOs are tending to stay away from that unless there's something in the geopolitical environment that is directly impacting the company or the bottom line or the day-to-day work that everyone is doing. Where I think that falls down a little bit is there's got to be some recognition that all these outside forces and outside pressures are having an impact on people. Like, you can't ignore the news, and we're all impacted somehow by what's going on in the world, whether or not we're feeling fear or anger or whatever. We can't, it's not severance. We're bringing this stuff into the office a little bit, and there's got to be a little bit of grace and a little bit of understanding. So I think for internal comms, the message is just, hey, if you need some space, if you need some time, take it, be judicious about it, but still we understand there's a lot going on and not take stances. Because I think it was Jen who brought up Target earlier. I think when the company tends to go back and forth and that kind of thing and see how its policies impact business and then flip-flop back and forth without the consistency, that creates pressure on the employees, because every decision you make based on your values is going to either upset a fraction of your audience or empower a fraction of your audience, and it's just going to not go well. So I think to some extent, staying the course on business, commenting on geopolitical affairs where it impacts your business specifically, in also kind of a reactive kind of way, not, unless you feel strongly and you are very much politically involved in saying we're going to stand up for this, then, internal comms can sometimes work against you, because again, like I said, people feel empowered and people feel a lot like they've got a lot of chutzpah these days. So what you say internally will leak out and can work against you or work for you in certain situations. But I think to the comms point of being able to see around the corners and the cost of doing something, we need to be able to say to the CEO, if you say this, if it gets out, this is the potential blowback, or this is the potential cost of doing this. Sorry, I kind of meandered there for a little bit, but it's a difficult topic.
And again, Jen, so just to wrap up, how do you think there's an opportunity for internal comms given the how it seems like, at least based on the news that I read, that companies are recognizing that employees are their most important stakeholders, one, and two, anything could leak today. Is there an opportunity for internal comms to rise up? And you're on mute, so maybe we should just go right to Meredith.
Jen said the most brilliant thing in those 10 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh, you guys, it was so good. I can't believe you missed it.
Good. Drop it again, girl.
Look, yes. I mean, yes, I think the challenge today is internal comms is stuck in this weird gap between being loved and actually being funded.
Yes.
So many execs are like, oh, we're so happy with our internal comms team, or like, we need to do more. But then they're not following it up with investment in the work. And so I think, I can't remember where I saw this, but I'm pretty sure there was recent research that like internal comms headcount, it has stayed flat for the last like 3 years or something like that. So that's not, I think nobody's arguing against the importance of internal comms. It's just, I think that it's hard to figure out where in an organization needs to write the check, right? Because it doesn't show up as a fire the way that, putting out maybe an external reputation risk does. Sometimes it's going through, ops, sometimes it's going through HR, sometimes it's finance in an organization, right? I think if I were putting a business case together, which most of us are probably going to be having to do soon, there was some research from Axios, I think, that put a dollar amount on bad internal comms. It was like, I don't know, 50 grand, or I'm making it up, 50 grand a person, right? And so if you can build a model, marketing does this all the time. They build models and formulas that are proprietary and vetted internally, but they're not some extra, they're not some external thing delivered from on high. They're homegrown. We should be doing the same thing. work with finance, build out a model, take in some external data points, and add some variables in there, and go to finance and say, look, we are seeing there's going to be a gap here. It's going to grow. We think it's going to grow X points in this year. Don't treat internal comms as the thing to defer until the macroeconomic environment improves, because this gap is accelerating. I think we need to start thinking about how we start to build our own cases and steelman arguments in light of the fact that nobody else is going to come, write us a check without having done that hard work.
That's a mic drop moment. I don't want to add to that. Thank you, both Keith and Jen, who are more internal comms experts than me.
Well, it was a really good point. And it reminds me of something Stephanie Roberts, again, I keep mentioning her because she's so good at this stuff, but she talked about the value of having a bad intranet, right? Again, I'm not familiar with this as a PR person, but a bad intranet, if it costs this amount of time per person and you have 20,000 employees and you're paying your average employee, I'm making this up, $40 an hour plus benefits, call it $50 an hour times 20,000 wasted hours is, anyone do the math?
Yeah, well, and Dustin, Axios had a great graph for this, and they've put it out a couple of years
Yeah, that's
running.
right. Yeah, we should pop it in the chat. But we should take that data and build a model, for your organization. I have this number of employees. This is my budget today. This is where best in class organizations are. Here's the gap. We don't have to fill the gap, but what would it take realistically to improve, to not shorten, decrease the gap, right, by 10 points or whatever it is. But marketing does this all the time. Finance builds their own models all the time. We should be doing the same thing.
Yeah, and engaged audiences are always more productive, and I think that that's our business case for being able to solve the financial gap. And I know it's kind of a mushy discipline, but it's still, to Jen's point about building the financial case, we've got to start putting metrics to this stuff, because otherwise we're not going to make that business case for funding us. And we're still going to be running on SharePoint 10 years from now, and we're still going to be using Outlook 10 years from now. And every single internal communicator is going to be screaming to the heavens about, why can't we get a better provider? Why are we so understaffed and working 80 hours a week trying to force things through Outlook?
Well, moving on that very positive note.
It is positive. We are the masters of our destiny. Truly, I actually think this is a really positive position. If we have the ability to advocate for each other and for ourselves, we have the ability to build dashboards and business cases and make the case. We have the ability to go deliberately get literacy in finance and the language of business. All of these things are within our control. I think it's never been a more exciting time to be in the communications field.
Again, as a math nerd, I appreciate the last thing you just said, because it's true. If you can understand the math, you can translate into anything. My first journalism job was actually as a blogger for a federal budget tax organization. So I was putting out 20 pieces a week on the federal budget and taxes. It was great. So yeah, being able to do that now, and we, again, this financial lender client, I'm super excited because we get to talk about the piece we just got published by them was how to make strategic debt an ally, not an anchor. Right? Being able to talk about that money side, allow us to build real trust with this client very early on, because we're able to understand the math side of it. So again, someone put in the comments that if you can go to the mid-level financial people, they'll often be your hat because they love to explain things. So if you can, as the comms people, go to those people, they have more access and just as much understanding as the top people, and they'll be able to really help you. And I don't remember who said it, but it was a great comment. So yeah, go to your internal financial people, like Jen said, get their advice, because that's going to help elevate you threefold, fivefold very quickly.
Get their advice and ask them to build the model for you, because they want to have the case too. I have real success with that. If you can work together on it, and then they feel like rock stars showing up to these marketing meetings as their finance business partner and saying, oh, I vetted this and we've built this whole thing. It will get you stronger investment, I promise.
That's super smart. All right, folks, got to jump. Hope you all have a good long weekend, and take care of yourselves. Keith, Jen, Meredith, thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dustin. Thanks everyone. Happy 4th.
Thanks, everybody.